excited and I'm challenged. I'm really excited because I get to share my message with all of you. And I'm really challenged because I have a tendency to go off on tangents. So keeping within the timings is going to be quite interesting for me tonight. But unfortunately, I've got somebody at the back holding out time placards, so that should help. Now, tonight we're here to talk about emotional intelligence. Now, in order to talk about what it is, we also need to know what it isn't. So I'll be talking about that as well. And I'll be giving you 3 ways to increase your emotional intelligence through sharing 3 stories with you. And emotional intelligence for me is the same as heart health. The two are very, very closely intertwined. So just by a show of hands to start things off, who here would like to have a healthier heart? Just so I know. Wonderful. Anyone wouldn't like to have a healthier heart? Just checking. We need to know who the masochists are just before we kick the thing off. So glad to see that that's happening. Now, I've been told that when we give talks, it's really interesting to give an interesting fact, a fascinating fact or a really interesting hook. Well, I've decided to do something a little bit different and come clean with a confession. Because although I've got over 18 years experience in health and well-being, prior to this, prior to me even starting my training in health and well-being, I've also got 17 years experience of growing up in a lunatic asylum. It's quite interesting, the reaction when I get that, because I frequently throw this into conversations with people and they go, yes, yes, I know what you mean, I grew up in a lunatic asylum too. And I'm like, well, maybe you don't quite understand. You see, my parents were both psychiatric nurses, and when I was 8 months old, they moved us within the grounds of a psychiatric hospital, way before political correctness had become trendy. So, as far as I was concerned, it was a lunatic asylum. And when I got to school, I found out it was a nut house. And that I was a lunatic and a psycho. So the good news is that if a lunatic can make it onto the stage of the Yes group, there's hope for anybody. So, let's talk about emotional intelligence. Let's talk about what it is. Now, to find out what emotional intelligence is and why you want to know it, you need to know exactly what it is and what's the opposite of heart health. What's the opposite of emotional intelligence? And the opposite is a heart attack and early death. So now I've probably got your attention and maybe brought the tone down a little bit. Let's look at some statistics. Let's see why heart disease is one of the biggest issues we have. In the UK alone, 1 person dies every 6 minutes of a heart attack. 172 people every day lose a parent to heart disease. It's a bigger issue in the USA. 1 person dies every 34 seconds. And 1 in 4 people will die of heart disease in America. Worldwide, the World Health Organization will tell you that over 7 million people die of a heart attack. And less conservative estimates put it at over double. Which means that worldwide, 1 person dies at least every 4.5 seconds. And depending on the statistics, that could be as little as 1 person every 2 seconds dies of heart disease worldwide. It's a huge problem. And just because people aren't diagnosed with heart disease, they don't die of heart disease. I come across a lot of quirky studies when I look into this subject. And one such study was a study they did on 30,000 troops that died in Korea in 1952. Their average age was 22. Now, for whatever reason, someone decided to study the hearts of these 30,000 troops and found that in over 77% of cases, there was gross evidence of heart disease. So just because people aren't dying on the statistics of heart disease doesn't mean that they don't have it. This problem is huge. In America alone, they spend over $380 billion each year on this disease, which tells me there's a huge gap in our understanding of heart disease and what causes it. And for me, that gap is emotional intelligence. Now, I'm going to share 3 stories. I don't want you to think about what I'm going to tell you. Thinking is up here. Emotional intelligence is from here. So I'm going to give you 3 tips and I'm going to share 3 stories from my journey along the way. Now the first thing was, I worked as a nurse for many, many years. And one of the most difficult things to do was be on a ward. A doctor walks in and says to somebody, "I'm sorry, you'll be dead within 2 weeks, there's nothing we can do." And when somebody delivers you a death sentence, and then goes off the ward, and someone comes up to you and says, "Is there anything I can do?" To not be able to offer somebody hope in that position, it steals a piece of your soul. To watch someone die and then go to the relatives and say, "I'm sorry, your loved one is dead," it takes a bit of your soul. Over time, this was taking its toll on me, and it wasn't until my granddad got cancer I finally decided there has to be another way, because I knew what was ahead of him in the NHS, and I had to find something different to make a difference. Now, I'd heard about this thing called Reiki. Some hippie had drifted in one day and told me it's a universal life force energy. Anyone can use it, and you can learn it in a weekend. I thought, well, that's great, isn't it? I've spent 4 years training to be a nurse, to find out about pharmaceuticals, to find out about healthcare system, to be told by a hippie that I could learn a healing technique that can heal the world in a weekend. I was having trouble processing this. I never really believed it. Then when finally I decided I need to at least attempt something else, to find something else, I thought, okay, I'm going to book on this Reiki course. So I went along, I booked on the Reiki course, and I went to tell my dad. And my dad's a fairly laid-back character. And I said, Dad, I've booked on a Reiki course for this weekend. My dad just looked at me. He said, "What, son?" I said, "How much did you pay for that?" I said, "Well, it was £250. And he was drinking his whiskey at the time and spluttered it across the room. I said, "I don't believe it, son." He said, "Give me a tenner, I'll take you in the back garden and I'll teach you Reiki." I didn't even know what it was. I hardly knew what it was myself. So there I was going away on this Reiki course, and I walked in reasonably open-minded, but a little bit cynical, and I sat down in this group, and I looked around the room. Now, there were some people that looked sort of almost normal, but it seemed like this sort of tie-dye crew had come out, all these bloody necklaces, people that were in touch with spirit guides and talking to people I couldn't even see. They talked about auras, chakras, universal life force energy, and communicating with people I couldn't even know about. It's fair to say that I thought I was in with a bunch of lunatics, and coming from someone that grew up in an asylum, that really is quite a statement. So there I am in this room thinking, what's going to happen now? What's next? And I started asking lots of questions. I was putting my hand up. More questions. Tell me, what about this? And I asked so many questions that the Reiki master got fed up with me. And after 2 hours said, "No more questions. I will never get through the content. It's not going to happen." So I was angry, I was fed up, I had all these questions inside me about connecting with this universal life force energy, which apparently our spirit guides are just going to bestow upon us, and then we can go and heal the planet. Come Sunday, I thought, well, this just isn't for me, and the worst part was that the Reiki master said, "Right, okay, now what you need to do is go and heal yourself. Work on yourself for 3 weeks and don't drink." I lived in a nurse's home. That was the biggest issue I had. Don't drink for 3 weeks. Don't you know it's not me that needs the healing? I'm here for everybody else. I watch people die. I watch really sick people. I'm physically fit. I was working part-time as a fitness instructor at the time, taking circuit training classes. I was training for football twice a week. I was in physically the best shape I've ever been in. And he's telling me to go and fix myself when there's sick people in the hospital to sort out. I was angry. I left and I wasn't even going to do Reiki again. It didn't make any sense to me. None at all. 4 years of training and a weekend wasted. But then on the Monday, I did the training on the Saturday and the Sunday. I did Reiki 1, Reiki 2 in a weekend. I thought I'd get a double burst. And on the Monday, I was sitting down and a letter came through the door. Now, I'd paid £250 for the course. I paid £5 to get there each day. And that morning, I got a cheque through from a company who 1 year ago I thought I'd been okay. I bought a video camera off them on hire purchase. We had a disagreement. I closed that case. That morning I got through a cheque from them saying, I'm sorry Mr. Shaw, we've overpaid you, here's a cheque for £260. And even in my cynical mind, I thought maybe, just maybe this is a message from the universe. So I did Reiki on myself for 3 weeks. I started to feel an ache in my heart. And this was weird. I'm getting chest pain, but it's not the symptoms. I was working on a cardiac care ward, looking after people that had heart attacks. And I'm doing healing on myself, and each time I do it, the pain's getting worse. After 6 weeks, the pain was so bad that I had to cancel all my shifts. I didn't understand what was going on. It was just too weird. And I sat there doing Reiki on myself, and I suddenly had this epiphany that even though I was physically fit, my mindset was catapulting me to all of the symptoms of the diseases that I was hoping to solve. And the lesson was that I needed to work on me. Any healer has to work on themselves first. The most important relationship that anyone has is the one with themselves. And until we get that right, there's no point looking to heal the rest of the planet. Now, with this insight that I had, I went back to the cardiac care ward. I worked lots of shifts. And one of the biggest things when people have heart attacks, one of the biggest complaints, one of the biggest concerns that people have, is they didn't see it coming. It came out of the blue. They didn't know it was going to happen. And yet when we track it back, with the new insight I had, I started asking questions and found out that heart disease leaves a trail so blatantly obvious. Every single person I spoke to experienced most of these symptoms, and some of them experienced all of them. Just before a heart attack comes little warning bursts from the heart. Maybe it's a flutter, feel your heart do this, or a short stab that goes into your chest. It lasts a fraction of a second. That's your heart saying, if you don't change now, you're going to have a heart attack. Everybody gets that who has a heart attack. Prior to this, the usual things, hypertension, diabetes, things like this, medical conditions that we all know about, the doctors will tell you. But prior to this is the big one. People will feel stuck, and it's a feeling, it's a belief up here, they'll feel stuck in a job or relationship that they don't love. They've got bills to pay, they've got family to feed, they've got a house. The hassle of breaking up would be too much. And people stay stuck in these relationships and jobs. Before that is what we call a midlife crisis. This lack of purpose, this feeling of emptiness, this not knowing what life has to offer. You come through this crisis. What is life? What's it all about? What's the purpose of it? Prior to this, low motivation, high stress. One or the other, sometimes both. And right back here, near the beginning, is you'll have a really poor relationship with at least one close family member. But right at the root, if you want to know if someone's at risk of heart disease, right at the very beginning, get them to look in the mirror. And if the person looking back at you, if you don't love that person at least as much as the person you love the most in the world, then you've got heart disease. Because you love someone else more than yourself. Now some will argue that that's a good thing. But usually it's not just one person, it's lots of people. And we put ourselves way down in the pecking order. And the relationship with ourselves is the most important one. Now with emotional intelligence, one of the best examples I had was my little nephew. My sister and brother-in-law had had an argument. They were under phenomenal pressure. He'd been laid off, he'd lost his job, and they had an argument. My sister had come round to my house and brought the boys. And when I went to bed that night, my nephew was sitting there, little 4-year-old nephew, with his head in his hands. And he sleeps really well. I said, Connor, what's wrong? He said, Uncle Lads, My daddy doesn't love me anymore. Of course your daddy loves you. How could you possibly think that? I went to give him a hug, Uncle Lads, and he didn't want to hug me. He doesn't love me anymore. Now, I just read a book called The Little Soul in the Sun by Neil Donald Walsh. Has anybody read that book? If anyone hasn't, read it. It's the most amazing book. In a nutshell, I say, do you know the little soul in the sun? There were two little souls in heaven. And one of the little souls went up to God and said, God, I love everyone. I want to be the little soul of love. God said, well, you go and be the little soul of love. Because everyone loves you. And the second little soul went up and said, God, I want to be the little soul of forgiveness. God said, well, you go and be the little soul of forgiveness. He said, but up here, God, there's nothing to forgive. Everyone loves me. And the little soul of love heard this and saw how distraught the little soul was and said, I know, let's go to a place where we forget who we are. And then I'll do something nasty to you and you can forgive me. But you have to remember who I really am once you've done it. So they go to this place. The little soul of love does something horrible to the little soul of forgiveness. But there's this moment where they forget who they are. In the end, they remember. I watched my little nephew. I knew it as a principle in my head. He really got it in his heart. And his face lit up. And I could see him start beaming. I said, so who do you think your daddy is? My daddy is the little soul of love. And who are you? And I am the little soul of forgiveness. Now, emotional intelligence is going swiftly to the optimal feels best. And that was it. Now, another thing I used to do things that feel good. Now, I work with the UK Stress Management Society, and they asked me to come and do free hugs with them. I thought that sounds like a gimmick, but we went along. We gave out free hugs for the morning, and it was the afternoon, and I was sitting there, I had the banner under my arm, I was queuing for a meal. And I saw her across the road, there was a lady with a Zimmer frame, and big, thick glasses, staring at me. I thought, I wonder what she wants. I went a bit closer, and I saw her, she moved her Zimmer frame, and she cut me off, and she said, excuse me, love, does that say free hugs? I said, yes, it does. Would you like a free hug? I'd love a free hug. I gave this lady a free hug. Now, I thought this was a gimmick, but I knew that it could make a really big difference in a tiny piece of time. I connected with people. And as I gave this lady a free hug, she started to cry. I said, are you okay? I said, I'm sorry, dear. It's just 3 years ago my husband died and nobody's hugged me since. Doing things that feel good, it's good for your heart, it's good for your soul. Do things that feel good. And as I sat there with Connor, and I said to him, listen, Connor, we don't always remember who we are. Sometimes we need someone to remind us, to get in touch with who we really are. And it's not always easy to feel good. And if you need anybody to talk to, I will always be there for you. My little 4-year-old nephew looked up at me and said, Uncle Lance, says, if you ever need anybody to talk to, I will always be there for you. If you're not feeling good, if you're not finding this emotionally intelligent place where you can move to the place that feels best, get someone to help you. If that's a professional, if it's a friend. And this isn't just somebody who's going to put their arm around you and tell you everything's going to be right all the time. They'll know the difference of when to do that and when to give you a good kick up the backside as well. Sometimes your best friend will do that for you when you need to move on. So get help. There is no such thing as a negative emotion. Your emotional guidance system is there to show you how you feel about this stuff that goes on in life. And if you don't feel good, your heart wants you to know you've got to do something, you've got to change. You have to change now, or your heart is going to get worse. And when we get these thoughts that we can't change, someone's done something so terrible to me, we get stuck in these hard thoughts, our arteries start to harden. This has been proven. Get help. And as I was going through this epiphanous moment, I don't even know if that's a word, but I use it anyway, I suddenly realised that all of my thoughts were catapulting me towards a heart attack and early death because I didn't love myself enough to repair all of the things in my life that weren't working. And I suddenly had this catharsis and I was crying uncontrollably. And then suddenly, like Scrooge on Christmas morning, I went round to all of my friends and close family relatives and I said, you know, I really love you. Now, we weren't used to using that word in my family. We weren't used to hugging each other. And the first question a lot of them wanted to know was, okay, Adam, that's great, but what drugs are you taking? Do they have any side effects? But once we got through that barrier, I had a deeply moving experience with every single one of my close family members, some of who are dead now. But my memory is of sitting there, having that moment, and for some of them it was very funny. It was very funny to see that. So what is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence, for me, every time I did that, my heart, the pain started to go. And 2 days and about 20 proclamations later, I felt fantastic. And the biggest thing that I've learned with emotional intelligence is the most important relationship in your life is the one with yourself. If you get that one right, every other relationship in your life will be fantastic. That, for me, is emotional intelligence. Thank you.